In the quiet heart of rural, a rancher's simple act of kindness turns into a chilling nightmare when he's told, "You already paid. Just do it." What follows will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. The sun dipped low behind the vast Wyoming plains, casting long shadows over the Turner Ranch. Dust rose behind an old Ford pickup as Caleb Turner, a rugged rancher in his mid-40s, drove home from the livestock auction. His tan skin was lined by years of sun and labor, his hands calloused from fixing fences and hauling feed. The ranch was everything he had left of his family. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. Yet lately the work had grown harder, the debts heavier, and the nights longer. The quiet hum of the truck comforted him, but as twilight deepened, that comfort began to fade into unease. A few miles from his ranch, Caleb noticed something strange. An old woman stood on the side of the road, her frail figure outlined against the dying light. She wore a faded blue shawl that flapped in the evening breeze. Hitchhikers were rare on this isolated road, and something about her made him hesitate. She looked out of place, too fragile to be standing alone in the middle of nowhere. For a moment he thought of driving past, but something inside him, a memory of his late mother's kindness, made him pull over. The gravel crunched as the truck came to a stop beside her. He rolled down the window. "Ma'am, you all right out here?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the silence. The woman turned her head slowly, revealing a face creased with time but strangely serene. "Just trying to get as far as the crossroads, dear," she said softly. Her voice had a calm, old-world charm, like someone who had seen too many winters, but still carried grace. Caleb nodded, unlocking the passenger door. "Hop in, I'll take you there." She smiled faintly and climbed in, clutching a worn leather purse close to her chest. The smell of lavender and dust filled the cab. As they drove, neither spoke for a while. The headlights cut through the dusk, illuminating the endless stretch of road ahead. The radio crackled faintly but offered no signal. Finally, the old woman spoke. "You're a kind soul," she murmured. "Most folks these days wouldn't stop." Caleb gave a half smile. "Just doing what's right. Roads like this can get dangerous at night." She looked out the window, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Dangerous," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "Yes, I suppose they can." There was a quiet weight in her words that made his chest tighten. They passed a rusted road sign that read, "Turner Ranch, 2 miles." The woman's eyes followed it. "Turner Ranch," she said slowly. "That's your place?" Caleb nodded. "Been in my family for 3 generations. My granddad started it." She turned her head toward him, studying his face with unsettling familiarity. "Ah," she whispered, "the Turners. Good land, strong stock, but heavy soil." Caleb frowned slightly. "Heavy?" She didn't answer. Instead, she smiled faintly, her gaze returning to the window as the first stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky. A few minutes later, the truck reached the crossroads, a lonely intersection marked by an old wooden post and a flickering streetlight. Caleb slowed down and stopped. "Here we are, ma'am," he said. "You sure this is where you want off?" "There's not much around here." The woman nodded. "This is far enough. You've been kind." She reached into her purse and pulled out a few crumpled dollar bills. Caleb waved them off. No need for that. It was just a short ride. But she placed the bills firmly on the dashboard, her wrinkled hand trembling slightly. "You already paid," she said quietly, her voice distant and cold. Caleb stared at her, confused. "Paid? I don't understand." The woman gave him a look that chilled him to his bones, a mix of sorrow and something like pity. "You will," she whispered. Then she opened the door and stepped out. Before he could say another word, she disappeared into the darkness, her blue shawl fluttering in the wind until it was gone. Caleb sat there for a moment, frozen. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the wind whispering across the plains. When he finally looked down at the bills she'd left, his heart stopped. The money wasn't normal, it was old, yellowed, and worn thin. The ink had faded, but he could still read the date. 1893. A chill ran through him as he picked up the bills. They felt dry and brittle, like paper that had been buried for a century. He shoved them in his glove compartment, trying to shake off the strange feeling crawling up his spine. Maybe it was some kind of antique currency the woman carried as a keepsake. Maybe she was confused or lost or both. Still, the way she had said those words, "You already paid," kept echoing in his mind as he drove the rest of the way home. The ranch came into view, a vast stretch of dark fields and weathered fences under a silver moon. Inside the house, Caleb poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to calm his nerves. The storm lamp on the counter flickered as wind rattled the windows. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman's face. Her eyes seemed too knowing, her tone too deliberate. When he finally went to bed, he dreamed of horses running wild through the fields, and a blue shawl tangled in barbed wire, fluttering in the wind. The next morning, before sunrise, he went out to check on the cattle. The air was crisp, the ground damp from dew, but as he approached the west pasture, something unusual caught his eye. Near the old barn, a part of the property he hadn't used in years, the soil looked disturbed. The ground was uneven, as if someone had recently dug there. He walked closer, boots sinking into the soft earth. It looked fresh. He crouched down, brushing the dirt with his hand, and his fingers struck something hard. Wood. Frowning, he began to clear away the soil, revealing the outline of an old wooden box. As he uncovered more of it, his pulse quickened. It wasn't a box, it was a coffin. The wood was dark and splintered, the nails rusted away. The lid was cracked open, and inside was nothing but dry earth and a torn piece of faded blue fabric. Caleb stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. It couldn't be. The shawl, her shawl, was right there, half-rotted but unmistakable. For a long moment he just stood there, staring at the coffin as the morning light crept over the horizon. He felt cold all over, despite the warmth of the sun. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, breaking the silence. He looked toward the road, half expecting to see the old woman again, standing by the crossroads. But there was only wind and emptiness stretching out to the hills. When he finally turned back toward the barn, he noticed something carved faintly into the coffin's wood. Letters worn almost smooth by time. It took him a moment to read them, but when he did, his stomach dropped. The name carved into the wood was Martha Bell. Caleb didn't know the name, but deep inside he felt its weight. He didn't yet understand who she was or why she had appeared to him. But one thing was certain. Something had been unearthed that was never meant to be disturbed. And as the wind swept across the field, the faint whisper of a woman's voice drifted through the air, low, distant, and filled with sorrow. The night settled heavy over the Wyoming plains, wrapping the Turner Ranch in an eerie stillness. The wind had died down, the stars hung sharp above the dark horizon, and the barn stood like a silent witness to something unspoken. Caleb Turner sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his mind circling back to that coffin and the old woman's words. The shawl, the name carved into the wood, and those brittle old bills from 1893. It all felt like some twisted puzzle. He wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but deep down he knew better. The land remembered things, and somehow he'd stirred its memory. By morning, sleep had eluded him completely. He saddled his horse and rode into town, his thoughts restless and sharp. If anyone knew about strange stories tied to his land, it would be Earl Reeves, the local historian. Reeves ran the small county museum out of a converted train station, surrounded by old maps, ledgers, and faded photographs of settlers who had carved their lives into the wild soil of Wyoming. When Caleb pushed open the creaking door, the old man looked up from his desk. "Caleb Turner," he said, smiling faintly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Caleb didn't smile back. "Maybe I have," he said quietly, taking a seat. He told Reeves everything, about the woman in the blue shawl, the old money, the coffin by the barn, and the name carved into it. Reeves listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious by the minute. When Caleb finished, the old man stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a worn leather book. "Martha Bell," he murmured, flipping through the pages. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in years." He laid the book on the table and pointed to a yellowed page. "She lived near your property back in the 1890s, married to a rancher named Thomas Bell." According to county records, they owned most of the land your grandfather later bought. There were rumors, stories passed down about debts, land disputes, and a disappearance. Folks said Martha vanished one winter and was never seen again. Her husband claimed she ran off, but the town never believed it. Caleb's stomach twisted. "You think he buried her?" Reeves nodded grimly. "That's what they whispered. Said he hid her near the barn and sold the land soon after. A year later, he left town. Nobody knows where he went." Caleb felt a chill crawl up his spine. "My granddad bought the ranch from a man named Bell," he said slowly. "But he never mentioned any of this." Reeves leaned back, sighing. "Some stories stay buried, Caleb, but sometimes the ground won't let them rest forever." Caleb sat there staring at the ledger, the realization sinking deep. The land that carried his family name had been built on a grave. Maybe that was what the woman meant when she said, "You already paid." When he left the museum, the sky was dark and heavy with clouds. A storm was coming. Thunder rumbled across the plains as he drove home, the wind picking up dust and dead leaves. The moment he stepped out of his truck, he felt it. A strange charge in the air, like the ranch itself was alive, waiting. The horses were restless, snorting and stamping in their stalls. The cattle huddled close together, eyes wide and anxious. Caleb tried to steady his breathing as he walked toward the barn, the flashlight beam cutting through sheets of rain. That's when he heard it. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, circling the barn. But when he swung the light around, there was nothing there. He gripped his rifle and stepped into the open. "Who's there?" he shouted. Only the thunder answered. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement by the fence. A shadow, slight and graceful, gliding through the rain. He turned the light toward it and froze. The old woman was standing there, her blue shawl soaked, her eyes glinting like pale glass under the stormlight. "Why are you here?" Caleb demanded, his voice cracking between fear and defiance. She didn't move. "I told you," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You already paid. Now it's time to set it right." Caleb lowered the rifle slightly, heart pounding. "Set what right?" She raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the barn. "Where he left me," she whispered. "Where you found me. The debt must end." The wind howled and lightning split the sky. Caleb turned toward the barn door. It swung open on its own with a loud groan. He stepped inside, his boots sinking into the wet earth, and saw the coffin again. The lid had fully come off this time. Inside, beneath the soil, something metallic glinted faintly. He grabbed a shovel and began to dig, each strike sending mud flying. After a few minutes, he uncovered a rusted metal box. He pried it open, his hands shaking. Inside were brittle papers, old deeds and contracts, their ink nearly faded away. Among them was a letter written in shaky handwriting. It read, "To the one who finds this, my hands are stained with what I took. The land was never mine to sell. I buried the truth and her with it. May whoever inherits this soil bring her peace." The signature at the bottom read, "Thomas Bell." Caleb stared at it, realization washing over him. His grandfather had unknowingly bought stolen land, and the woman who haunted him had died because of it. When he looked up, the woman was gone, but her voice lingered in the air. "Now you know," it whispered. He took the papers inside and dried them by the fire. By dawn, he'd made up his mind. That morning, he hitched up the truck and drove straight to the county office. He laid the old documents on the clerk's desk and told them everything. It took hours, but when it was done, Caleb had legally turned over part of his land, the section where the barn stood, to public trust, marking it as Martha Bell Memorial Grounds. "This land was hers before it was ever ours," he said quietly. The clerk nodded, moved by his words. When Caleb returned home, the storm had passed. The air was still and fresh, and the sunlight poured across the plains. He stood on his porch, watching the breeze ripple through the grass. For the first time in days, the ranch felt calm, peaceful, almost alive again. As he turned to go inside, something caught his eye. On the porch railing lay the same old bills the woman had left in his truck, neatly folded, dry as if untouched by the storm. Next to them was a small piece of fabric, a fragment of the blue shawl. A note was pinned to it in delicate handwriting. "Debt settled." Caleb stared at it, his heart full of something between sorrow and relief. He looked out over the fields, the horizon glowing gold under the morning sun. For a brief moment he thought he saw her standing far out in the grass, her shawl fluttering in the wind, her face peaceful. Then she was gone. The wind carried her whisper one last time, soft and grateful. "Thank you." And as Caleb turned back toward the ranch, he knew the land was finally at peace. And so was he. The debt that haunted generations had been paid in full, not with money, but with truth.